Hey, DNA. Kate Wilson here with another episode of All Access DNA. In today's episode, we are talking to Jacalyn Lee, she/her, about her personal journey as a mother to a child with an ultra rare genetic condition called DEF1 associated neurodevelopmental disorder, or DAND. After her daughter's DAND diagnosis, Jacalyn launched the Atypical Advocate, a Substack newsletter that shares the complexities and joys of raising a neurodivergent child with complex medical needs. She also founded the DAND Alliance nonprofit. We talk about advocating for your child, the impact of genetic testing, and why parents keep going even if they feel like a hot mess sometimes. Let's get started. Hi, Jacalyn. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
There is a lot that we can talk about today, given your experiences, your passions. However, I do want to focus on the work that you are doing for neurodiversity advocacy and raising awareness for DAND, or DEF1 associated neurodevelopmental disorder. So first, maybe you can tell us a bit more about why you do this work or how you came to work in this space.
Sure. So I do this work for kids like Isla, my 5-year-old who has DAND, which, as you mentioned, stands for DEF1 associated neurodevelopmental disorders. But originally, she was actually diagnosed as autistic right when she turned 2. And so I kind of went into this world of advocacy and learning as much as I could about autism, and felt like I learned a lot of information along the way, thanks to a lot of, medical professionals and psychologists, et cetera, who helped me. And so I, in turn, then was helping my friends who were kind of in those early stages of diagnoses, and felt like there was this opportunity to share the information that I was so lucky enough to have learned along the way with a broader community. And so that's why I started a Substack newsletter. I became credentialed as a non-attorney special education advocate to better advocate for my daughter. And that's kind of how I fell into this world.
You do a lot of different types of things in terms of like raising awareness, advocacy. You mentioned the Substack that you have, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. The Atypical Advocate, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things in reading some of the Substack postings that you had put on there, you talk about the grief and the anniversary of learning that your daughter Isla has autism.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciated how open the writing is, and it's very powerful that it's raw and vulnerable. But I was wondering if you could share more about kind of the cycle of feelings that happen when it comes to getting a diagnosis. I think that's one of the things that I've heard, but maybe not articulated as well, as that sort of kind of grief that comes along with some of this.
Yeah. So, I feel like this is a long story, but I guess rewinding all the way, originally when she was just about 1, I had felt like something was different and had really pushed for an evaluation. And I ultimately got her, Isla, into a research study at Child's Mind Institute in New York City. And thinking maybe she's autistic, but maybe she's not, right? Because everyone around me was basically saying that I was comparing her to her big sisters, and, her big sisters were verbally advanced. And so I was hoping that that was true, but also something deep inside felt like something was different. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I'm going to get emotional. It's been like a really rough week. And anyway, so I got her into Child Mind Institute. And I still remember the day that we had the feedback session, and they said that she actually is diagnosed as autistic. Mm-hmm. And that if we had not brought her in, she could have been missed hypothetically for years for a few reasons. Oh my God, I'm like already emotional, Kate. And it's been like a rough week. Anyway, so she could have been missed for years, hypothetically, for a number of reasons. One being she was so young. She was just 2 when she was diagnosed. She was a girl, and girls are really good at masking. And at the time, her traits are not overt, right? And so if you don't really specialize in autism, and a lot of pediatricians obviously don't, she could have been missed. And I really held on to those words, like she could have been missed for years, meaning in my head, oh, it's not that bad then. Like, she'll be okay. She'll be okay. There's a lot of neurodivergent people around us that are not diagnosed. She's probably going to be one of them, right? But we just know that she has a diagnosis. Anyways, so So after that, I definitely was in shock and grieving, but I also am very much like a action oriented person, and got her into this phenomenal program called the Center for Autism and the Developing Brain. And that team saved me. That team saved our family. They really, educated us on autism, all the myths and stereotypes out there, and helped us establish a broader team for her to get the services that she needed and the evaluations that she needed. And it's thanks to Cadby that we ended up getting connected to a developmental pediatrician who recommended genetic testing. And, when we did that, I thought, well, maybe they will find, one of the genes that's linked to autism, right? With Isla, that's what they'll say. But I didn't think anything would come out of it. Turns out we did 3 genetic tests. 2 were negative, but one actually turned out positive for her having this ultra rare genetic condition, which is DAND. So there's actually less than 200 people diagnosed in the world with it. And when the genetic counselor told me this, I think it just all felt very surreal, Kate. It felt like this is not real. We are not that family. But then also at the same time, like I mentioned, I'm an action oriented person. I just remember Googling what this genetic counselor was telling me while I was on the phone with her. I'm like, what is this? Wait, how do you spell that? And how many people have this? What do I do? Et cetera, et cetera. And so, anyways, long story long is it felt surreal. And I sprung into action. I was devastated. I'm still devastated. I'm still grieving. And in terms of the cycles of emotions, I think, like many atypical families like mine, it hurts more during certain things like anniversaries when a child speaks that's younger than yours.
Yeah.
It's like a slap in the face. So yeah, so I'm obviously still grieving, still
Well,
grieving.
yeah. Well, and I think it's important for people to realize, like, this is not something that happens in the past, and then you're like, "Okay, I get all the information, I come up with a plan, and boom, we're done," right?
Yeah,
We're on to the next thing. It isn't that way. And like you said, what I've heard other folks express is, like, they love their kiddo no matter what. The grief is for things that might have been,
yes,
or like you said, sometimes it is hard when you see a child younger that's reaching some of these milestones
yes,
that just the reality that you anticipated has shifted.
yes. I think it is, and I think a lot of families feel this way. It is this grief of this family that you had
Mhm.
imagined, this grief of a life that you imagined for your child, and as you as a family unit. And on some days it's easier, and some days it's harder, perhaps like
Mhm.
today. Yeah. And so, I think one of the things that I always remember is that grief is not linear, right?
Right.
It is this roller coaster, right? And there are some days where it's better and some days where it's harder. And I think there's a lot that goes into the reasons why that might be, like anniversaries, when you least expect it,
Mhm.
when you are over capacity, when you have not
Mhm.
had a good night of sleep, etc. But
Mhm.
ultimately, I think what has helped is for me personally, I've channeled my energy to action, with that Substack, with my community, building that community, finding that community has really been instrumental. And I would certainly say that, that Substack is therapeutic. Even though it's very emotional whenever I write anything, it's really therapeutic. I
Mhm.
would say like 90% of the time when I'm writing it, I cry. But I'm also a big crier, as you can tell through this session. And then I think for the rare diagnosis, banding together with 4 other incredible DAND moms, as we like to
Mhm.
call ourselves, has also been therapeutic. We see each other. We understand each other in a way that
Mhm.
a lot of our friends and family don't.
Right, right. There's things that you don't have to explain,
Yeah,
right? Because you have that lived experience.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Tell me a little bit about, 'cause you mentioned with Isla being diagnosed with autism first and then having the genetic testing. How did the knowing that she has a change or mutation associated with DAN, how did that change things for you or your daughter in terms of, services or other things to look out for or support, that was needed?
I think that information is power, and it gave me something specific, like
Mhm.
specifically medical, right? Scientific for me to like hang on to and think about, okay, if we can figure out, what is the genetic, like, how to learn more about the DEF1 gene, et cetera, that can help. kids like Isla and others. But in terms of her specific treatment and her, medical team and stuff, we had already done so much at that point. We had
Right.
already had a neurologist, a physiatrist, developmental pediatrician, all of the things.
Mhm.
So I think our team was in a good place. However, what I would say is it gave us more concrete information on things to look out for. We already
Mhm.
know that when you're neurodivergent, there is a co-occurrence for epilepsy, right? You are at a higher chance for seizures. And so that's why we already had a neurologist just in case. But now with the
Okay.
Dan diagnosis, we knew that we definitely need to keep an eye on this, right? With Dan, she actually has approximately an 80% chance of epilepsy. So
Mm.
now we know that we have to closely monitor that. And so she gets an EEG every 6 months now. And
Okay.
so I think information is power, like I said, and it gave us more information to accurately monitor for any characteristics that are prevalent and DAND.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and I think too, it talks about like the medical, but then the other is, you've been able to get in touch with some other moms and build a community because is this kind of specific in the medical community we say like etiology, but condition. And so have you found that that's been helpful to also, I guess, kind of have that name, Dan, to then be able to connect with other people?
Absolutely. It's actually funny. The day that we got her DAND diagnosis, the genetic counselor basically said that there's this organization called Simon Searchlight. Check them out. They might have some
Mhm.
information. And there's like a Facebook group for DAND, and I joined it and posted anonymously at the time like, oh, I just got this diagnosis, anyone else out there, what does the future
Mhm.
look like, etc. And somehow got connected to this woman, Leslie, in Florida, who is my OG DAND mom friend. Hi, Leslie, if you're listening. And her son Nash got diagnosed the exact same day. So in the rarest of rare worlds of
Yeah.
rare genetic conditions, Dan being ultra rare, her son, who is just about a year younger than Isla, got diagnosed the exact same day. And so I remember we did a quick text exchange and
Mhm.
then hopped on a phone call, and just it felt so nice to find someone that could understand the, like, wait, what is happening, like very much early days, like what's happening, what do you know, these are the few research papers that are out there, right? And like, what does your son do versus what does Isla do? And seeing the similarities and the differences between the two was extraordinary. And
Mhm.
then because of that, we then, I mean, like now I'm kind of fast forwarding here, but then one of our neurologists ended up connecting Leslie and I with another DAND mom in DC
Oh, wow.
who I would have never met. Um, and then we got connected. So it was the three of us hopping on a Zoom and just like, wow, your kid also loves to climb and do all these things and
Mhm.
all the stuff. And then ultimately, eventually got connected with two other Dan moms. So it's the five of us, this core group of five Dan moms that ultimately started this nonprofit called the DAND Alliance. Sounds like
Mhm.
dandelions, the flower, but it's not. The DAND Alliance. And we literally text like every day, 100
Yeah.
texts every day. And they're my closest friends now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I love that there were people putting you in touch with each other, but also finding each other like through the social media or different like platforms. And then you've now taken, like you said, that core group kind of 5 to turn it into this alliance. So tell us a little bit more about the alliance and what its mission is.
Sure. So the DAND Alliance is very much focused on raising awareness, understanding, and hopefully treatment of deaf and associated neurodevelopmental disorders. We are very much focused on, providing information for our community, but also the broader community. So that way they can better understand the DEF1 gene and translate how understanding that can help broader diagnoses. So, for
Mhm.
example, with the DEF1 gene, we know that it is closely connected to autism and also closely connected to epilepsy. So, one of the things that we're thinking about in these early days of launching a nonprofit is how do we translate that understanding for others, right? So that way they can
Right.
care about a disease that is ultra rare. And what I
Mhm.
would say is that by learning more about the DEF1 gene and hopefully funding it, then it can unlock a lot of understanding for autism and epilepsy. Autism, for example, that impacts so many people in the world. And I feel
Mhm.
deeply that there are probably a lot of kids and adults who would be classified as profoundly autistic, that maybe actually, yes, they're profoundly autistic, but they're profoundly autistic potentially because of rare genetic conditions like DAND.
Right. Right. That makes sense. And we've talked to a few other folks in the rare disease community, and that's kind of one of the take homes has always been, right? We might use the term rare or ultra rare.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes now we're finding out that maybe things are not as rare as we thought, right? Because we're doing more genetic testing, but then how what we're finding there plays a part into probably more common diagnosis of autism or developmental delay. And because we're still learning about what's causing some of these through these genetic tests.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for the dandelions, we are very much, we're new. We just launched a couple of months ago.
Mhm.
But we motivated, right, to build this infrastructure to accelerate science, connect Dan families, and, really push towards a treatment. And one of the things that we always say is that we are in this Renaissance era. We're in this
Mhm.
Renaissance era of scientific discovery, of gene therapy, advances in AI research. And with a lot of patient advocacy groups like the Dandelions, that's really pushing this forward. And so, one of the things that people have said in the past is it's not just this kind of slow curve going up in terms of progress. It is hypothetically like a vertical line. And that is,
Right.
what I'm holding on to in terms of hope is that we are in this Renaissance era and things are accelerating in a way that's
Mhm.
never been seen before. And we are also lucky enough to have this phenomenal scientific advisory board from, Dr. Jennifer Bain at Columbia, Dr. Wendy Chung at Boston Children's Hospital, Dr. Park at Yale, Dr. Jensick at SIU. Like, we have this amazing community of experts that are helping us. And so I'm really hopeful. Some days,
Yeah.
maybe a little harder to hold on to that hope, right?
Yeah.
But it's something that we have to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah. I always repeat Dory from Finding Nemo. You just keep swimming. It's just putting that one little bit kind of, you might veer to the side, but ultimately you're just kind of little by little you're moving forward.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's nice about, having the dandelions is we do have like a front row seat
Mhm.
to all of the scientific discovery that is happening in a way where if I was just kind of still researching like what papers are out there so far, I wouldn't feel, I would feel hopeful, but I wouldn't be as closely connected to see how much science is advancing.
Right.
And so that's been pretty phenomenal. It's been pretty phenomenal. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, and I think with the alliance, it allows you and your group to be part of the scientific advancement. So it's not just waiting till all the things are happening, right, and collecting the papers. It's now being able to get in at the start before the papers are even written and trying to kind of figure out what's going to be helpful, what to fund. Um, I know one of the things that, and I'm curious to see how this impacts finding folks who have a genetic cause of their autism or developmental delay, is that the AAP or the American Academy of
Mhm.
Pediatrics has now, I think in the last couple months, recommended that children who have global developmental delays or intellectual disabilities or autism should get genetic testing. And that, I think it's like 1 in 6 kids fits that definition to potentially have this genetic testing. What would you tell somebody whose child has autism and is considering genetic testing? Like, what kind of advice or just support would you give them?
The first thing I would say to any family who has an autism diagnosis or frankly, feeling like there is definitely a developmental delay, et cetera, is to do genetic testing. It is better
Mhm.
to learn early on what is happening with your child versus sitting and waiting, in my opinion, right? And
Mhm.
so genetic testing, I think, provides critical information. So your doctor, as I mentioned, can accurately monitor and treat your child. Like I said, now we know that Isla has this 80% chance of having seizures, right? And so we can keep a closer eye on things. So that's the first thing I would say. I think the second thing I would also add is that, particularly in the world of rare diseases, every single patient counts. Like,
Right.
literally. And I think the data point is 1 in 10 Americans have a rare genetic condition, and about half of them are children. And so when more people do genetic testing, the more likely researchers are interested in studying these specific conditions for our kids. And you need those numbers to get any scientist interested. And so, like I said about Dan being ultra rare, but potentially a lot more people being impacted by it, if there's more people with it, then that's a broader community to tap into for
Right.
driving awareness, for driving understanding, and hopefully therapeutics for Dan, right? And then the third thing I would say is community. Like, it is such an isolating and overwhelming experience when you have an atypical kid. I have, a great community of friends, but unless you understand this firsthand, you have no idea what we are dealing with and struggling with day in, day out. So finding community and connecting with others, can make you feel a little less isolated, and you can connect with others on some of the challenges and also joy, right? That we
Right,
have with
right.
every single inch stone that our kid achieves is really meaningful when you have others that can understand firsthand.
Inchstone, I had not heard that term before.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So not milestones, but inch stones. So, Isla, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, said night when she was going to bed. And, if you're a typical family, you might not necessarily think anything of it, but it was huge.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it reframes things, and so like you said, you have a deeper appreciation for some things that other people might see as sort of a small thing, but it is quite a big thing. It is an inch stone because it is a touchstone there.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
One thing too that I always hate to get into, but I feel like we have to, especially us being in the US, is insurance and genetic
Uh,
testing with insurance. I know you can speak to like your experience and you've probably chatted with other families, but how is this genetic testing? I mean, is it covered by insurance or are there ways to defray the cost of the testing?
I think that for genetic testing, it would ultimately depend on your insurance. And my hope is that with the updated guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics, insurance companies will be more apt to cover it and have less pushback, right? However, it does depend on your insurance. I would also add that if your child has Medicaid as a secondary insurance because of a disability, that can hypothetically cover genetic testing as well. But if those two are not options for your family, then there are free resources. There's one that I love to always mention, which is Spark from the Simons Foundation. And with Spark specifically, if your kid has an autism diagnosis, you can go to their website, fill out an application, and see if you qualify for free genetic testing. And if you do, they'll send it to your home, and you literally do like a little swab sample in your mouth, in your kid's mouth, and then you just ship it back to their lab for analysis. And I think, one of the things that I've found in this world is just how, frankly, lucky or privileged I am to be able to access information like this, right? But there are so many families who don't. And so I find it really important for people to know about some of the free resources out there, because things like genetic testing can be really expensive. Things like psychological evaluations to see if your child even is autistic or not can
Right.
also be really expensive. It can cost like
Right.
thousands of dollars, which is obscene.
Yeah.
And so I love sharing free resources whenever I can. And specifically for genetic testing, Spark from the Simons Foundation is one of them. And I know that you didn't ask this, but for psychological evaluations, I would highly recommend looking for research studies at local, hospitals or institutions in your area to see if there are any free research studies that you can put your child in. For Isla specifically, I got her into Child Mind Institute through a
Mhm.
free research study that I mentioned earlier on this session. And
Okay.
not only did it provide a free psych evaluation for 3 years, like regularly, but
Mhm.
we actually were able to get her evaluated sooner than later, because a lot of these psych evals have like months and months long wait lists. If you're in Connecticut out there or by Connecticut, there's the Yale Child Study Center. It's McPartland Lab. They also actually are recruiting right now for kids 3 years old and up, and they provide free psych evals. And if your child is diagnosed as autistic, then you have that free evaluation. And then
Right.
you now have that autism diagnosis that you can then share with Spark and get that free genetic testing, right? And so yeah, I would just say, look into free resources, because the neurodiversity world and the services that you have to try to tap and access can be incredibly expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's hard too is that sometimes it's trying to figure out where do we start this journey? Where do we start this service? I know that for some of these referrals, like you had mentioned, it might take a while to even get in to see that
Yeah.
clinician. And so that can also be a barrier. So I think that's extremely helpful, and we'll put all these resources in the show notes is because it's good to know that there's ones out there. They still not we still kind of have to get them out word of mouth, but it's
Yeah.
good to know that they're out there.
Yeah. I think the first step though is that genetic test. You need that genetic
Yeah.
test.
Well, yeah, because
Right?
it can kind of be that propulsion maybe to open up some other doors and get in touch with other clinicians, other people in the community as well.
Absolutely. I think that's why the updated guidance from AAP is so powerful because instead of this wait and see approach, right, that
Mhm.
can add like a year long time before you have a clear understanding of what's happening can mean a lot to families, right? Wondering like, is it me? Kind of like how I was like, am I just comparing her to her verbally advanced older sisters? Like, thank God I did not listen to that pediatrician. Like, honestly, I just
Right.
trusted my instinct. So if you're a parent out there, trust your instinct, advocate for your child and yeah, listen to your gut.
Yeah. I think that's a huge one, and I especially come across that in moms, is the am I being reasonable or not? And it's kind of one of those things where, like, you start to have a little bit of self-doubt, but like you said, you have to listen to your gut. You know your kiddo, and you know when something else is happening.
Yes. I mean, the reality is, some of these doctors, and I love doctors, I love our medical team, just to be clear. But
Yes.
sometimes there are doctors who do just see your child, what, for 15 minutes, 20
Mhm.
minutes, twice a year. They don't know your child the way that you know your child, right?
Right.
And they're not seeing everything that you see on a daily basis. And so, you have to take in their expertise, right? But you also have to keep in mind what you also know in your heart and what you're seeing on a daily basis and getting an evaluation and just asking for a second opinion is helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of those things too, is there's nothing wrong with going and getting that second opinion or even potentially a third opinion. You're able to do that. Tell us a little bit more about your Substack, the Atypical Advocate, and what you're working on, or what you do on that platform.
Sure. So the Atypical Advocate is my Substack newsletter. And it is a place where I share my journey, I share resources, ultimately for families raising atypical or neurodivergent children like mine. And I would also add that it is a way to hopefully make the broader community, right, who might not be directly connected to neurodiversity, be more inclusive, be more empathetic for kids like mine. It's kind of my hope that, the experiences that I share make families like mine feel less alone and hopefully give them information that they can use, like free research studies, et cetera, et cetera. But also, really, if I can do anything to make people a little bit kinder and inclusive to kids
Mhm.
like Isla and give people grace to families like mine, then I'm doing it. And so that's why I started this Substack newsletter. Uh, and it's very nascent, it's small and growing,
Mhm.
but I've selfishly also found it very therapeutic. And I've also, now started doing things like this, like Kate, and like speaking with other people to kind of share my story, share resources, and also like started doing guest speaking and opportunities like that. And so it feels like it's not all for naught, that even
Right.
though it's like maybe a small community that I'm reaching, that it is a powerful community, I hope, that can help spread the word.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a powerful community, and I think it's a needed community. These are putting kindness, inclusivity, all of those things. I think there's never going to be enough of that, and putting that out there.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
One thing I will say, so when we first chatted before we did the interview, you're super energetic, super passionate. I was just kind of in awe of the energy that you have. And I actually saw on your LinkedIn profile somebody described you as a force of nature, and I want to say I could totally see that. So, what is it like being a working mom of three kids, one of whom has Dan's, but you're also an advocate, you do some writing, and you're running a nonprofit. So, what is that like? How do you find the time to do all of these things?
I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah.
That's very kind that that person said force of nature. I feel like I'm a hot mess sometimes. I mean, I was like crying on this session. Oh my God. But I would say that I feel like, I'm human. I feel like a hot mess sometimes, but it's a
Mhm.
season. Sometimes I feel like I'm not doing anything well, honestly. But it's all a season, right? And so
Right.
maybe I'm in a little bit of a stormy season right now because I have a lot going on with my paid job.
Right, right.
but I love doing it all. It's how I process grief, I think, too,
Mhm.
in a way, is to do the things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I would say, for parents in general, right? Like whether you have a neurodivergent child or a medically complex child in general, like I think us moms, especially, we're really hard on ourselves, right? We're trying to do all of the things. And so I try to practice self compassion. Some days it's harder than others. I also think that having good childcare helps. One of the things that we used to
Mhm.
say when I worked at care.com is that care is the work that makes all work possible. And at the
Mhm.
time I was child free. I never like really thought much about it beyond like that's what we say. And yes, it's true. But like now that I live it with 3 kids, oh yes. Like if I'm having a childcare situation, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm a disaster. So, to answer your question, it's definitely a lot. Establishing boundaries has helped. Therapy has
Mhm.
certainly helped. Saying no has
Yeah.
helped.
Yeah.
Saying no is hard, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
But,
especially if it's things in the vein of things that you're passionate about or that you're intrigued by or that you may want to do, because I get the sense that a lot of these things are very passion driven. You're very motivated. And so it can be challenging sometimes to figure out where to put that energy
yeah,
and where's the right place.
definitely. I feel like in my head, even today, I'm like, there are so many things that I want to accomplish today. And like, how am I going to do it?
Mm.
I think that we've been very fortunate though at the Dandelion specifically, where I've been able to tap my network and others on the board have been able to tap their networks to get help, pro bono help. And that has kind of helped take the load off a bit. So like, I'm just going to give you this funny example. So Lesia, who is a biomedical engineer with a specialty in genetics on our
Mhm.
board. Before we had a graphic designer to support us, and we understood how important it was to like, get some graphics out there, post on socials, etc. She was the one that was like trying to resize logos and make graphics and like, one sheeters and etc. So that way we can share it with our community and on social media. And I'm like, how are we doing all of this? Like, and this is not even our specialty. And so I think at one point I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna post on LinkedIn and see if anyone can help. And so I did this like plea for help and on LinkedIn, and someone who I had worked with like over a decade ago tagged somebody named Gina, who I guess they had worked with at their job about like, oh, maybe you can help them. And then so she messaged me saying like, "Oh, hey, like, do you want to have a conversation? I might be able to help, etc." And I also cried on that first call with her because I was just so amazed and grateful that a complete stranger was like willing to help us. And so, oh my God, like what is wrong with me, Kate? I'm like crying again. And it just amazes me. The generosity that people have, in helping us. And so that's just one example of, being able to access other people to help us to kind of take that load off. So that way we can do all of these other things. So we have this wonderful woman, Gina, who's providing free graphic design work. We have this other woman who's been helping us pro bono with legal services. Right. And
Mhm.
then we just had a conversation with a former coworker of mine at Equinox, whose cousin-in-law will now help us on like a director, executive director level to keep us moving. It's just amazing.
Wow.
I'm just
Wow.
I just have so much gratitude to all of these strangers who are willing to help us and our kids.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it speaks to a community that you have probably built over the years that you didn't even realize you were building probably at the time that's showing up. And it also speaks to the power of just putting it out there and just saying, look, we need help.
Yes. Yeah. I think especially in the world sometimes that we're living in, it can feel a little bit down, right? And but there are amazing people out there who want to help, and their capacity might change depending on the week or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
but they're out there. But I think you have to ask for that help.
Yeah.
Don't be shy about asking for that help, and that's something that I've definitely learned through this process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed talking to you, and I feel like there's even more we can explore. But in the interest of keeping this under an hour, I would like to know if there's one thing that our audience can take away from the conversation, or one thing you want them to remember? What is that?
Does it have to be one thing?
It it doesn't. I will tell you, we've had plenty of guests that are like, "I'm gonna give you 3." And I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." Or honestly, sometime 4 or 5.
I would say that, listen, awareness is the first step, right? And I think podcasts like All Access DNA is helping with that. I would hope that my little Substack is helping with that. And and I would also say that action is what's going to change lives for families like mine. So do the genetic testing, donate to the Dandelions if you can. And if you can't, that's totally okay. Help spread the word about what we are doing. Reach out to your friends who have neurodivergent kids, check in on them, ask them how they're doing. I think a lot of people don't do that because it's uncomfortable for them. Like they don't know what to say and they don't know what to do. And so they're just quiet. They don't ask, right? But that silence perpetuates this isolating, lonely experience. And you don't want that for your friend. So check in on your friends.
Right. I think that's extremely, extremely good advice and extremely good takeaway. Because I think it's one of those things too where you don't even necessarily have to say something. You just need to ask the question and just let your friend talk, because they may just need that at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, I have enjoyed talking with you so much, and I will be keeping up with the Dandelions and the Atypical Advocate. And I do hope at some point maybe to meet you in real life, because that would be lovely.
I would love that. I would love that.
So we'll stay in touch. But thank you so much, Jacalyn.
Thank you, Kate.
For more information about this episode, visit allaccessdna.podbean.com, where you can also stream all episodes of the show. This link is also in the show notes for easy access. Any inquiries on the podcast can be sent to allaccessdna@gmail.com. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/allaccessdna and consider donating to get bonus content, submit questions for our guests, and connect with other genetic curious individuals. Note that this podcast is for entertainment and education and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult your physician with any questions you may have regarding your health. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This helps other people like you discover the show. All Access DNA is hosted, produced, and edited by Kate Wilson. The logo design is by Designs by NKJ. Thanks for listening, and join us next time.